hear me okay? This is working. Okay, thank you for inviting me along. It's always nice to be back home in Perth. So thank you. I've been asked to come along and give you the view from Westminster, if you like, to give you an insight on what's going on in Westminster. So as well as getting the fire warnings, the toilet warnings, I should give you a warning that this is really not for the faint-hearted. It's something that you need a strong stomach. I hope your tea has been well digested. I don't think there are many people who can argue that the Brexit or the process to leave the European Union is going terribly well at the moment. I'm going to talk a wee bit. I'm going to talk you through that a little bit about what's going on, what to expect over the next little while as well. I think one of the most depressing things around this, certainly from my perspective and from people who maybe supported others who supported independence in the past, is that a lot of what drove the vote to leave the European Union, certainly south of the border, was this idea of parliamentary sovereignty, and that sovereignty should rest at Westminster. Given that, I'm afraid that the powers in terms of what happens next, a lot of the action does take place at Westminster. And I'm going to talk a wee bit in a minute about how I would like to see the devolved administrations a little bit more involved. But I'm afraid that as much as I would like to see that happening, that is not the reality. So I think what I'm trying to say to you before I give you my comments is you might get frustrated with Westminster, you might like to poke fun at Westminster, it might be a hoot looking at what the Foreign Secretary says, but it matters, and it matters to each and every single person sitting in this room at the moment what goes on at Westminster as well. That's the depressing thought just to get us started. I'm afraid it goes downhill from here as well. So the background to this is, I think it was 500 days since a referendum on November 5th, Guy Fawkes Night. Now there's a metaphor in there somewhere, but I'll leave that up to you guys. 500 days since Scotland voted 62% to remain part of the European Union. That's really important because that gives you the context in which we see things, and I, as a representative of the Scottish National Party, see things as well. And obviously there was a narrow vote to leave in the United Kingdom as a whole. That's quite important, that 62%. What's also important is when the day we left the European Union is that there wasn't a manifesto, there wasn't a white paper, there wasn't anything that really gave us much in the way of a direction about what happens next, which is one of the reasons why we're scrabbling about to fill in the blanks at the moment. And unfortunately, although that's not a situation I would like us to be in, it's one that we must all take a little bit of responsibility for, trying to fill in the blanks as well. I think that the kind of politics whereby we stand up and say we told you so, whilst might make us feel quite good and certainly reflected in what's happening now, is not one that's terribly useful for people whose jobs rely on our relationship with the European Union. Just after the vote, the Scottish Government pulled together a group of experts actually from different political parties, judiciary, academics, people who'd worked in the European institutions, and pulled together a compromise. And that compromise suggested that Scotland would respect the vote to leave the European Union, but we'd remain part of the single market and the customs union. Why that's quite important is that was actually quite a big step to take, to concede the point on leaving the European Union, because I'm somebody who believes that Scotland should be a member state. I believe the UK should be a part of the European Union. So that there was that compromise came in December. And that wasn't just one that was drawn together by the Scottish Government, it was one taking into account a large number of experts as well as representatives of other political parties as well. I thought that was a really sensible approach to take to this, because this was such a big decision that I don't think one political party has the answer to how we take things forward. I contrast it, and I'll make this contrast to where we are. Ahead of the vote on independence, the Scottish Government produced a 670-page white paper. People may not have agreed with everything in it, but the whole point in a white paper is to provide you not only with something to debate around and something whereby you say, this is our position, we stand by this position and here's the background to it, but also should you have, if we'd had a yes vote, then the Scottish Government would have been honour bound to have kept to what was in that white paper, because that's what you're voted on, that's your contract, if you like, just in the same way that my contract with people in North East Fife has to be that I try and implement as far as I possibly can what was in the SNP manifesto, because that was a commitment on which I was elected. That's a normal process of elections. So it was a little bit disappointing that the next bit of the jigsaw, if you like, is that Article 50 was triggered at the end of March. Now, the Prime Minister didn't need to trigger Article 50 at the point, and what I thought was irresponsible about triggering Article 50 was that the blanks that we had from Vote Leave, that blank piece of paper, was still very much a blank piece of paper. But it's been triggered. And once it's triggered, as set out by the treaties, you have until the 29th of March 2019 in which to leave the European Union. No ifs, no buts. That's what it says in the treaties. And the treaties don't say much, but what they do say is you have 2 years. Subsequently to that, the Prime Minister obviously called an election, and we had the general election in June. And why the general election was important was the Prime Minister referred to that as, she called it, in her words, a Brexit general election. And the answer of people, in Scotland was to return a majority of seats in Scotland were returned to the SNP. We lost some good people, but there was still that majority there. And in the UK as a whole, there was a hung parliament. I don't think that was a bad thing. Actually, in the aftermath of the general election, the Westminster Parliament became that little bit more European, in the sense that having hung parliaments, having a parliament of minorities, just as it's something that's become quite common in devolved administrations, so too is it something that's common in other European legislatures as well. I don't think it's always a bad thing where you don't have one party that has a majority. And actually, I'll say something. The SNP was in a minority administration between 2007 and 2011, and it's my opinion that some of the best legislation that the SNP passed was in that period as a minority administration. And actually, the Scottish Government has produced an ambitious programme for government. Again, you don't have to agree with all of it, but they've done that on the basis of being a minority administration that needs to reach out to others. That culture isn't catching up with Westminster, but if this government is to survive, if this parliament is to survive, the culture of Westminster is going to have to change to be that little bit more European, to be that little bit more Scottish, Welsh, Northern Irish in its approach to how we take things forward. That's why the latest debate that we've had is that 500 days on, we were told that the impact assessments that we'd been promised previously still aren't ready. And whereas the Brexit Secretary, David Davis, told us that we get these in enormous detail, by the time it came to debate in the floor of the House 2 weeks after it was in front of a select committee, we were told that there wasn't actually that much detail in the impact assessments. So there's a role for Parliament, there's a role for parliamentarians to try and fill in the gaps. But I don't think this should just sit with the Westminster Parliament. As we know, there are 111 different pieces of legislation that should be going back to the Scottish Parliament without touching the site, as we were told during the referendum, just as we were told that we get immigration powers going straight to the Scottish Parliament as well, which isn't going to happen either. But I think if you're going to find a way through this, you need to involve the devolved administrations. You need to involve people from other political parties. And I'll talk a little bit about the withdrawal bill and some of the work that I'm doing, but I'm having to sit down with representatives of other political parties whereby we disagree in a whole range of areas, but we have a responsibility to try and find common ground where we possibly can. We might not like it, and it might, but that's the nature of the politics which we have at the moment. So just if I can make one other contrast, if you'll forgive me. Had Scotland voted for independence, I'm saying this just in a way to show that you can set out your pathway to big constitutional change. There was a commitment made by Alex Salmond that Scotland's negotiating team would have been made up of members of civic society in a broad range, but also crucially that the leaders of every single parliamentary party in the Scottish Parliament would have been part of that negotiating team. And I think that was the right way to approach these changes, where you try and represent as much of Scotland as you possibly could. And it's been a shame to see a minority, a government elected on a minority, try to do this all by themselves. I think it's anti-democratic, but critically I think that they just don't have all the answers. And their ineffectiveness at delivering Brexit, delivering on their manifesto commitment, is becoming more and more apparent every day. On the gaps, I think this has a particular impact on small businesses, because of course if you want to import and to export, you want to know that you have common regulations across the European Union. The great thing about the European Union is it actually cuts down on bureaucracy. Whenever I've asked questions about more officials, more bureaucracy, I've been told that we will need more officials to deal with Brexit. You will get more bureaucrats with Brexit. You will get more bureaucracy with Brexit. That's the nature of it. You step outside the customs union and all the changes that you need to make there. So that's a particular impact on small businesses who can't afford teams of lawyers in different European capitals. Seasonal workers, and we're just probably, and Jim will correct me as I get this horribly wrong on agriculture, but we're coming towards the end of the harvest season when you'll see people who are out and about. I learned something fascinating recently, which is there are 2 parts of Scotland where you can grow broccoli. I don't know if anybody knows 2 parts of Scotland. I now do. I didn't 2 weeks ago.
It's got to be Fife.
You can grow it in northeast Fife. That's how I knew, because it was a farmer next door to my house. And you can grow it in Angus. Now the reason being is that it's sunny in northeast Fife. It's a nice place to come and visit and go out for your day trips. It doesn't get too much sunshine, and the same in Angus. Now critically with broccoli has to be harvested by hand. We don't have technology, it's not one of these products you can send out. It has to be harvested by hand. And I was speaking to the farmer next door who doesn't know if he should be seeding £750,000 worth of broccoli into his fields at the moment, because what happens if the seasonal workers don't come back and the seasonal workers are down? And unfortunately, because he tries to recruit locally, but he depends on people coming in from elsewhere, that's going to hit his business. And that's a big investment for some. It's a lot of money to invest if you're not going to be able to harvest the food stuff and be able to get it into the shops and therefore get your money back. Universities, biggest employer in my constituency is the University of St Andrews. It gets £38 million, 21% of its research funding comes from the European Union. That's good for all of us because we benefit long term because of the breakthroughs that are made through the collaboration that St Andrews makes with other universities from throughout Europe. But it's also a big employer, keeps folk in jobs. Also for me, and this is a bit more important, it makes our society that bit more diverse. And I think that the EU nationals who are Scots, it's not that they should be able to call Scotland home. This is their home, as much as it's my home or anybody else's home. And for them not to have the certainty, it makes us lack competitiveness. But there's also a human element for folk who put down their roots, whose kids are at schools, who've got jobs, who contribute to societies here and contribute to our to make this a better place to live as well. A lot of our food products get cleared, believe it or not, through the port of Rotterdam. What happens with that next? A lot of it's cleared given the customs union. Financial services, we already know that financial services, a lot of the jobs are already starting to go, and that means that the bankers who are paid lots of money, a lot of them will be fine. So a lot of the ancillary staff who depend on the financial services will be the first ones to go. It'll hit people lower down on the pay scales. And this is something that's personal to me. I mean, I went to Perth Academy. After I left and went to university, I was able to do Erasmus. I was fortunate enough to do Erasmus. I was able to benefit from freedom of movement. I think that as a politician, I have a responsibility that young people coming after me should at least have the same opportunities as I've had. And that's not something I can guarantee. That's not something I can stand up and say will be the case for the generation who are maybe at Perth Academy just now and want to have the same opportunities as I had. And that's something that any politician should always strive, that the generation coming after them should have at least the same opportunities as they've had. So what next? Well, it's all quite fluid at the moment. But on Tuesday, the withdrawal bill starts its progress through. I'll be speaking on Tuesday afternoon if anybody's watching at about 4 o'clock. We'll be opening up on the withdrawal bill. We've put down about over 400 amendments that have gone down to that. We're seeking support for them. I can't tell you what's going to happen because I don't know at the moment, but we are working hard. It's not just us working hard. Others from other political parties, we're working hard with colleagues from other political parties. To give you the devolution and the devolved administrations, to be fair, Carwyn Jones and Nicola Sturgeon have put other differences to one side, and the amendments that I've put down that have gone down in my name and other MPs' names on the impact on devolution were drawn together by the Welsh and Scottish administrations together, and the Welsh government were assisted in the work that they did because Plaid Cymru and Welsh Labour put aside their differences and they produced a joint paper, and fair play to them. That's not an easy thing to have to do, especially in our sort of political environment and our culture as well. And the view from the European Union on all of this is one that they're desperate to find out information. Now, I've been hearing from Conservatives who are in favour of leaving the European Union that somehow the EU should be showing more flexibility. Well, look, the UK is the one that needs to change. The UK is the one that wants the change, and the UK government cannot come up with the EU needs to find out what are the proposals, and that's why the blank piece of paper that Vote Leave campaigned on. It's why not having any more details when Article 50 was triggered, and why we don't have impact assessments at the moment is so damaging. It's not just damaging for those of us who want certainty, but the EU 27, believe it or not, don't want an unsuccessful United Kingdom on their immediate borders, but they need some details because you need somebody to negotiate with. If somebody comes along and says to you, I want to change the nature of our relationship, and you'll say, right, okay, how do you want to change the nature of our relationship? And they can't tell you. Your negotiation isn't going to go very far. So there appears to be some frustration coming out of Brussels, but I don't believe that the EU wants to somehow punish the UK for what it's doing. I think the UK is doing a pretty good job all on its own at the moment. I just wanted to give you that as an overview, and keen to open up to when we have time for more questions. But the future is very, very, very fluid. I think what I'm able to tell you now about the situation at Westminster will probably be different by the time we get to Christmas, if we get to Christmas, in terms of the withdrawal bill going through. So we've got a crucial November and December coming up when this will certainly be already, this will continue to dominate my life and my work. But the big thing that we have to stress to folk is this makes an impact. It'll impact on everybody's jobs. It impacts on the human level for folk who call this country their home, and it impacts on future generations in terms of the kind of country that you want to live in and the opportunities that you have for the people that come after this. Thank you.
Thanks very much for turning out, ladies and gentlemen, and thanks to the organisers for asking me to speak here tonight. It really came out of the blue. I wasn't expecting to be doing this, but I'm here. So Stephen said that this will have a direct impact on all of our lives. Well, I can tell you from my own point of view, this will have a massive impact on the farming community's lives, and I'll try and give you a bit of the detail of how that's going to happen as the evening goes on. But I was really curious to see on all the social media platforms that this thing was advertised that it was a Brexit update. And I thought, who else is on the panel is going to give us a Brexit update? Because Theresa May and the entire cabinet couldn't give us a Brexit update. So, God help us as to where we're going, because I don't think any of us know. As Stephen says, we might not even get to Christmas before another general election campaign, because the way she's going at the moment, it's an absolute car crash. For any of you who knew or went to any of the Yes campaign meetings in 2014, you would have heard me speaking, and you would find that I'm a bit of a Eurosceptic. So there's a bit of a divergence between myself and Stephen. And there are good reasons for me being Eurosceptical. Some of the legislation that they've brought in relating to agriculture is ludicrous, it's pointless, and it's punitive in its result if you get it wrong. So I can fully understand why some of the farming community who've come in for a lot of stick voted leave, because they didn't look at the bigger picture. They looked at the day-to-day things that were happening on their farms and saying, the European Union causes this, if I can get out of the European Union and stop this, then that'll do for me. And they didn't think beyond what the bigger picture was. Well, the bigger picture is starting to emerge for them. And I travelled around 2 or 3 of the agricultural shows over the course of the summer. And hill farmers in particular were coming up with, yeah, this Brexit thing's not really working out, is it? Really? I said, what did you expect it to be? And one lad said to me in particular, this is David Cameron's fault. He called this referendum because he couldn't get a deal. And I said, what do you mean he couldn't get a deal? He said, well, he went over there. He should have come back with a deal. If he'd come back with a deal, I would have voted to remain. But he came back here with nothing, so we need to bloody show the Europeans I said, how's that working out for you? He said, yeah, I think this is going to be alright. Time will tell. So they voted in large numbers to come out of the EU without fully understanding, because as Stephen said, there was nothing to vote on other than a big picture of the style of bus saying we're spending 150 million on the NHS. So anybody who was at the going round the campaign meetings in 2014, you would realise that I was a Eurosceptic, but I'm also practical. There are good things that come out of the EU, the trading relationships. There's lots of things that are good about the EU. The bit that I don't like is the loss of sovereignty. But that's not where we are right now. Where we are right now is an absolute nightmare scenario from a business point of view of where it's going to take us. The worst possible scenario during that campaign for me was if we voted no in 2014 and then the UKIP party had a big rise in the following election. We had an in-out referendum on the basis of UKIP pushing the Tories. We came out of the EU, still part of the UK, and we had a right-wing Tory government. What was that going to do to agriculture? Well, we're about to find out, because that's exactly what has happened. So it's been the worst possible case scenario from my point of view as to where we were back in 2014 as to where we are now. And I understand that there are people in here who didn't want to break up the United Kingdom, and that's absolutely fine. That's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about now is where we are as Scotland and what our relationship is with the rest of the UK and the rest of the EU. So from an agricultural point of view, what does it mean for us? We have to put our faith now in the UK government to be able to deliver the policies that are going to make agriculture work in Scotland. So to put our trust in them, we have to look at their past record. Oh boy. Convergence. The convergence criteria was the European Union looked at Scotland's per hectare payments across the entire country. And the method of working out how much money a farm or a part of the industry gets is saying there are so many hectares, they're going to get so many pounds per hectare, it will be given to the member state, and the member state will then divvy it up accordingly. So that means that the UK receives a big sum of money, and they say, right, okay, Scotland, that's yours, Wales, that's yours, Northern Ireland, that's yours, England, that's yours, and they split it up accordingly. But because Scotland's very unique farming business, the way we work, I'm on a hill farm, so it's an extensive land area. We were the lowest per hectare payment across the entire EU because of hill farming, and it's predominantly because of hill farming. So the EU looked at that and said, as a measure of goodwill to the UK, we're going to give you £190 million or 220 million euros in that cap period over and above your normal allocation in order for you to bring the Scottish convergence, the Scottish per hectare payments in line with everybody else's in the EU. The UK government took 190 million quid and went, what do we do with this? Scotland, there's 16%. Wales, there's 9%. Northern Ireland, there's 5%. England, you're getting the rest of that. It was entirely against the spirit of what the EU had given it to the UK in the first place for, and it meant that the Scottish hill farmers who were supposed to have received £14,000 extra over that period to bring their per hectare payments up actually received 16% of that. And I can't work that out at the top of my head, so you'll just have to work it out for yourself. The UK argument against giving the full entitlement to Scotland was because Scotland had the highest per capita payment in the entire UK. Now, they may be correct, nobody's actually challenged that, nobody's actually looked at it and said, well, what is the per capita payment? Well, what they didn't take into consideration was, there's 2 points to that. The first thing is they didn't take into consideration that contract farm agreements are in place right across the agricultural sector in Scotland. And a contract farm agreement is where an estate, like Mansfield Estate, is what I have. I've got a contract farm agreement with Mansfield Estate. They get a lump sum of money paid through the Scottish Government, through the UK, through the EU. And that's our agricultural funding. Whatever the system, I won't bore you the details of the system. But that money is given to the Mansfield Estate. But there are 7 different families, all with independent contract farm agreements within that lump of money. So it's 7 different businesses that are getting paid out of it. The Mansfield Estate makes one claim, so as a result of that, it completely distorts how many claimants are making a claim. But that was the argument that the UK gave as to why we were the highest per capita payment across the UK. It was a completely distorted figure. But also, the methodology of working out how much money was to be paid wasn't the UK's to change. It was the EU decision that you get paid on a per hectare basis. But the UK government went, that's extra money, we're going to change the method of how we're going to make the payments. It was completely wrong, it was bogus, and they kept £190 million that should have come to the Scottish farmer. So we're looking for trust here. So then we go into the CETA deal. That's the Comprehensive European Trade Association deal between the European Union and Canada. Excuse me for a second. Every other European country had the opportunity to put in protected geographical indicators within the CETA deal. Now, protected geographical indicator is a protection on your foodstuffs. So, Scotch beef, Scotch lamb, Stornoway black pudding, Arbroath smokies, all of these things are protected so that nobody else can come into this country and sell the product with that brand's name on it. And your brand name is absolutely vital to your business being successful. The only country in the entire EU who didn't put in any PGIs for the CETA deal was the UK. And you think, well, why would you not do that? This was even before the Brexit vote had actually happened, and they still hadn't put in any PGIs for the Scottish foodstuffs. Now, when you consider that the food and drink industry is the fastest growing sector in our economy, it's worth £14.4 billion at the moment. Our exports have more than doubled since 2007 to £5.5 billion to our economy. When the SNP came in 2007, Richard Lochhead looked at what the Scotch whisky industry was doing, saying, we need to replicate that across the entire food and drink industry. So he set up the first national food and drink policy in Scotland, and it has been a phenomenal success. It's been a runaway success. And given the success that it's got, it needs to continue with that brand. It needs to have that prominence. It needs to be able to sell that. The things that make our product sell. It's like, swirling peaty water, it's big chunky glasses of whisky, and it's the evocative images that people have when they think of Scotland and the food and drink industry that we have. That's ours. That's our unique selling point. And yet the UK didn't see fit to put any PGIs in place when the CETA deal was being negotiated. Now you think, okay, the argument was, we don't sell any food into the Canadian market anyway. Didn't matter. We actually were. There was a bit of Scotch salmon that was already being sold in Canada, but it didn't matter. If we're going to have trading arrangements across the world, whether we're in or out of the EU, you need that unique selling point. So our unique selling point is that. That's what we are. We want to stick our badge on that because that's what makes us unique. And people go, that's good quality. I like that. I like the provenance. I like the history. I like everything about it. So I'm going to buy into that. That's why our food and drink industry is as successful as it is. It accounts for about 350,000 jobs, 360,000 jobs in this country at the moment. It is 19% of our total manufacturing output. It's a huge part of our industry, but the UK government didn't put any PGIs in the CETA deal or the Japan deal. That to me was criminal. So we're where we are. We're looking at what Brexit is doing, and it's horrific. And only recently we've had the Chatham House report, which has come out and said agricultural subsidies should be stopped and to allow free trade to grow at its best, the best way that it can. There will be a few losses in agriculture. A few sheep farmers might lose their jobs, or livestock might be in trouble, but that's a wee bit exaggerated. Not to me, it's not, because that's my livelihood. That's how I make my living. That's our way of life that they're talking about. And it's not good enough when you've got Chatham House reports coming out and saying a few jobs might be lost, because that's how we live our lives. If Michael Gove has his way, what is going to happen is the decisions that are made in agriculture and in fishing will be based on pounds, shillings and pence. It will not be about rural depopulation, it will not be about social infrastructure, it will not be about environmental benefits or environmental cohesion within the countryside. It will be based on pounds, shillings and pence. Now he's made the statements that we will look after the environment, we will continue to have all these stringent rules and all the rest of it. I have my doubts, because they didn't pay us our measures money. They didn't put PGI in CETA. I don't trust them, and it's as simple as that. If if we are then put into WTO schedules, now I've made a mistake here because I've mistakenly stated in the past that Michael Gove recently made a statement saying that food production can't be regarded as a public good. My understanding of that was that the only way that the EU would be able to pay direct payments to farmers was because food was regarded as a public good, producing food was regarded as a public good. That's not true. Now that just goes to show you how much misinformation is going about. I clung on to that, like, well, that's an absolute fact, but it's not true at all. The WTO schedule will be decided between the UK and the WTO when that time comes. Whatever that schedule is, so long as we don't have a policy which is market distorting, then we can work a policy that the WTO can live with. We have no idea what that's going to look like. What we do know is that the UK are terrified of rising food prices. If you're a UK farmer and you're not getting support, you need to take your financial income from the marketplace. Well, that's you. Whatever you buy, you're going to have to give me more money for it, or you're not going to get it from me. So if it's cheap food as the driver, and they're not going to support us, where's it going to come from? It can't come from me, because I can't produce it. I can't produce it at a cost that you're prepared to pay for it. And so is that your fault, or is that Michael Gove's fault? Society makes a choice on whether or not it wants to have a domestic agricultural industry. If you make that choice that you want to have it, you then have to rely on the government to be able to put in place a series of measures that will allow us to continue to produce food. But they have a difficulty in that they still have to find a schedule within the WTO that gives them a green box rather than a red box because they're not distorting the market. Very complicated. It's not simple. But it's a hell of a lot simpler if you just say, see the ones that can't manage? They're gone. And that, to me, is where we are heading. I was at the NFU Scotland Autumn Conference last week, and you're talking about the impact studies. There has been one done. The Agriculture and Horticultural Development Board. This guy, can't remember his name, brilliant guy. He's worked the Agriculture and Horticultural Development Board as a UK-wide thing, and they have done a scenario, or a Brexit scenario impact study, and it looks at all the different sectors within agriculture, whether it's potatoes or cereals or livestock or whatever, and it's all in there. It's not a prediction, it's merely these are the possibilities. But what they've done is they've looked at 3 potential scenarios. There's the least worst, there's the mid worst, and there's the really, really worst. The least worst one means that livestock farming, predominantly, that's what Scotland is predominantly, is in trouble. The second worst one is livestock farming, which is the predominant one in Scotland, is in real trouble. And the worst one is we're finished. And it's just as blunt as that. We're not kidding on here. It's if we have to go down the road that document has laid out this as the scenario, then the industry's finished. So I've been at various meetings and various conferences and listened to what people are saying, and I've heard it 3 or 4 times now. Some farmers are just going to have to change direction and get out. And I did, and I've done it. I've handed in my notice to a contract farm agreement. I'm coming out of the hill farm in November. Fortunately for my wife and I, we set up a catering business about 6 years ago, which is what we're talking about. And we make burgers, pies, sausages. We go to outside events and we do Tea in the Park, Rewine Festival, Royal Helen Show, big events where there's big numbers, and we do that for about 6 months a year. We used to do 5 or 6 events a year. Last year we did 25 with the intention of doubling that again next year. Because I cannot see a future in the direction that we're going just now of how I can continue to be a hill farmer. And that's tough. That's really hard. So those decisions are going to have to be made right across the industry, because there's lots and lots of people that are going to be in that situation saying, what do we do now? If you don't own your land, forget it, you're finished. You just cannot carry on. So there's lots of people. So when Stephen talks about this is going to affect people's lives, this is the reality of what it means to affect your life. The NFU have produced these policy documents, the change policy. They've looked at, these are the ideal scenarios that we would like to see happening within agriculture now that we're in the Brexit situation. It's cloud cuckoo land. There is absolutely not a hope in hell. It's great stuff. It makes absolute sense. But it's never going to happen when you look at what the UK government are doing. They're sitting in these meetings with them and they're getting all these assurances. But Michael Gove will say it to you there in the first 5 minutes, and he's changed his mind before he's gotten out the door, and he's telling somebody else something else as he's going out the door. So the industry is in trouble, and it's in serious trouble. One of the things that we were told after the referendum was that the repatriation of powers would mean that nothing that was, how was it worded, Stephen? Nothing that was currently devolved would be undevolved.
Wouldn't touch the site.
They wouldn't touch the site. I went to the NFU spring conference last year, or at the start of this year. Ruth Davison was there. Sorry, I went to the autumn conference last year and David Mundell was there. And this was before the negotiations had really got going, and I had an inkling that agriculture was going to be taken back to the UK before it was then decided what the policy was going to be, and then we get the bits of it back that the UK government decided was okay. So I asked them about this. Absolutely not the case. The powers will absolutely go back to Scotland. Nothing will be undevolved. Everything will come back to Scotland. That's fine. We went to the spring conference. I asked Ruth Davison the same thing. She said, absolutely correct. However, and this is when it started to change, there has to be a kind of overarching UK style agreement, because we can't have frictions within the UK itself. And I said, would you like to expand on that? And the chairman said, that's enough, Jim, you've asked your question, and he moved us on. Well, they still haven't explained to us what this overarching policy is going to be. They still haven't told us how many of the powers that are currently sitting in Holyrood are going to come back to Holyrood, because what they're saying at the moment is everything will come back to Westminster. They will then drop a UK-wide overarching structure, and within that UK overarching structure, the devolved parliaments will have their bits, whether it's Wales, Northern Ireland, Scotland. So I was at the conference again 2 weeks ago, and I asked Ian Duncan, if we're going to have this overarching policy, are we going to have this situation, as we do in the European Union, where it's, what do they call it, qualified majority voting. And what that means is I can say, hold on, I don't like that bit, we need to change it. And everybody around the table says, right, okay, let's find a solution. What we're going to get is Westminster saying, there's the policy, Scotland, that's your bit. And I'm saying, well, how is that inclusive of the devolved parliament? Stephen's sitting here talking about how they need to get round the table and work together. Absolutely not going to happen. Michael Gove is going to do this via committee. They've created committees where every single committee has got Tory majorities. Am I right in saying that? The committees that they're setting up to look at.
Despite its own parliament.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So all the committees are sitting with Tory majorities. They're going to give us what they decide is our entitlement as far as an agricultural policy is concerned, and then they're going to set another trap for us in exactly the same way as they did with income tax and say, Scottish farmers, if you're not getting your money, it's their fault. We've given them the powers, so there you go. So whatever way you look at this, agriculture is absolutely so, what do we do about it? I know that there are people sitting in this audience tonight who wanted to stay part of the UK in the last referendum, and I apologise if this offends you. We can do something about it. At some point, there has to be the opportunity for us to make the decision. Do we want to carry on with this absolute car crash, or do we want to take a different direction? As far as I'm concerned, I can't wait for them to call the time when we can start campaigning for that different direction, and that's what I'll be doing. Thank you.
Right, okay. So I'll comment very quickly on the. All I'll say, sir, is that you're very typical for EU citizens who run your own business, and you probably employ lots of people here and pay your taxes here as well. And I'm presuming you're not offshoring in the Cayman Islands or something like that. Like some people with only UK passports. On the issue that Mary Ward raised from Forfar, can I say just this frustrates me about the UK single market. So you can't replicate it with the EU single market. In the EU single market, there are 28 sovereign, independent member states. If you want to have a regulation on whatever it is, be it pesticides, the 28 member states sit down and make a decision. Sovereignty in the decision-making process lies at Westminster, with a falsely stacked committee in terms of that is not a single market in the European sense. You can call it an internal market, you can call it a single market if you like, but there is no co-decision, there's no qualified majority voting, there's no unanimity. It's Westminster taking decisions. Now, I know there's a bit of rhetoric around this, but the rhetoric plays out, which is, as well as taking back control from Brussels, whatever that means, you are also in effect taking back control from Edinburgh, Cardiff and Belfast as well. There is I think this has been a frustration of mine from day one, that people try and say, oh, it's an internal market just like the EU. No, it's not. That's a false comparison, because sovereignty does not lie in Edinburgh, does not lie in Belfast, and it does not lie in Cardiff. And people like me, and others will disagree, and I respect that, would like to see it rest in Edinburgh, but right now it doesn't. And while it doesn't, you cannot have that. And look, the convergence stuff that Jim brought up was a really good example. But there are also issues around what happens to LFAS when you've got less favoured area status, predominantly in Scotland, less so in England. So it's not the case, and it's not comparable. On the talks with the devolved administrations, yes, there have been talks. That's right. But it's one thing to have talks, and it's one thing to take on board the views and to actually have a two-way process. You and I can talk all the like. There are talks and there are proper negotiations. There doesn't appear to be anything even bordering on negotiation, which is why I think the First Minister's frustration when she came to talks is quite palpable. So, also, I mean, I'll say this as a final point. You can respond to your MP as you like, but your MP was also a person who said that she was not capable of making a decision over whether or not to leave the European Union. So just as well she's in a job where you don't have to make lots of big decisions every week.
It should be pointed out that Kirsten is one of the 13 Tory MPs that were voted in, largely in rural constituencies. There have been 3, I think now, what do you call it? See, that's why he's a parliamentarian. The Scottish Select Affairs Committee, they've had 3 separate discussions in the Select Affairs Committee regarding agriculture. Not a single Tory MP has turned up to any of them. And they're talking about having these discussions on a regular basis. Stephen says you can have discussions all you like, but you've actually got to take it on board. But Mike Russell was at the NFU conference a couple of weeks ago, and the joint ministerial committees that are supposed to happen once a month.
Yeah.
And how often are they happening?
Well, they had one recently.
They had one recently. There's a 7-month hiatus between that one and the one previously. So they're not actually talking to them at all. And at that conference, Ian Duncan, talking to the National Farmers Union of Scotland, said that by 2019, what they hoped was that agriculture would be out of the hands of the EU and would be part of UK legislation. Mike Russell, who's the guy that's sitting in the joint ministerial committees, is sitting in his pardon? When was this decided? He says, no, Michael Gove's quite clear on that. He says, but your Prime Minister has just told us that we're going to be going for a transitional period. He says, no, agriculture will be out on 2019, as will fishing. That is the negotiated position. He said, negotiated with who? Now, they were having this discussion on a table like this, in a platform at the NHUS conference. They may well be talking, but they're not actually telling the Scottish Government what's going on. And after that meeting, Michael Gove then confirmed that they were looking to take agriculture and fishing out of the EU by 2019. They didn't explain how that was going to work in terms of whether the payments would continue to come from the EU or would it be the UK. And if it comes from the UK, well, the Scottish Government will have to raise the funding through general taxation. There's no answers to any of that. And Mike Russell was sitting there as blind as I am sitting here without knowing any of the details of what that discussion was about. So I'm afraid Kirsten's selling you here. There are various assurance schemes across the entire UK. The Red Tractor is the sort of British standard. The Scotch one, if you go into a supermarket or a butcher's or anyplace else and you buy Scotch beef or lamb, you can be guaranteed that that was born, reared and slaughtered in Scotland, and at every stage of that process, the farmer, the haulier, the slaughterhouse and the processor are all Scotch assured, so they've all been inspected at various stages. And that's the level of assurance that the Scotch brand gives you. There are various things within Scotch that I disagree with and I want to change and all the rest of it, but that's irrelevant. For you as the consumer, you know that when you buy Scotch beef or lamb, that's the process it's gone through. I don't know what the Red Tractor rules are, because I never joined up to it. I never signed up to it. You can join Freedom Foods, which is an SSPCA-backed scheme, but you pay to be a part of it. It's as much about raising money for the SPCA down in England as it is about giving an assurance scheme. And the SSPCA and the SPCA are two entirely different organisations. They're not linked at all. As far as being GM free, Scotland is still GM free. The European Union gave each member state the ability to make the decision as to whether they want to be GM free or not. In terms of whether there's GM foods in the system in the UK, for the rest of the UK, I don't know, mate. I really can't tell you. What I do know is we don't grow it here in Scotland on an industrial scale. They can do trials and they can look at the results and all the rest of it. But until such time as the science has concluded completely that there is no threat to environment, long-term, short-term, medium-term, the Scottish Government have made the decision that GM crops will not be grown here in Scotland. But that's as much to do with perception as it is to do with the reality. Because the science, if you speak to an arable farmer today, he'll be jumping up and down saying GM is safe. The rest of the arguments about seeds and everything else for GM, that's an entirely different argument. What they're talking about is the safety of the food, of the product. And the Scottish Government have made the decision as much about public perception as it is anything else. I talked about the crystal clear waters, I talked about salmon, I talked about Scotch whisky, Scotch beef, Scotch lamb. We sell that as our fastest growing sector in our economy. If we start growing GM products, is that then going to start to make us look as though we are just like any other country in the world, that we're not as clean as we would like to tell the world that we are, and we're protecting the industry by beating the industry down, if that makes sense. We're not growing GM, not because we don't think it's entirely safe, but because the public perception is they don't want it right now, and until such time as we have absolute clarity on what it means long term, and the public accept it, it's not going to be grown here in Scotland. And we have to hope that when the EU rules come back to the UK, the UK overarching policy doesn't then turn around and say, and by the way, Scotland, you no longer have the right to make that decision. Now, I'm running a hair on this one, but I was also running a hair on the basis of the powers were going to be repatriated back to Westminster as opposed to back to Scotland. So it's something that I'm keeping a very close eye on, whether the UK decides that Scotland stays GM free or not. But what you have to, the Scottish Government hasn't banned fracking. The Scottish Government has taken the decision that they will not allow planning to allow fracking to go ahead. Again, we're in a situation where, as Stephen says, it's very fluid. We've no idea what the UK Government, once they've taken back control, are going to do with UK-wide policy. And it's one of the things that really scares me enormously, is that how much of these powers that are currently sitting with the Scottish Parliament are going to be diluted and eroded to the point where we can't make the decisions. And if they've got energy, I'm sure there's energy that's still there.
That's where the planning stuff comes in.
If they've got energy, does that overrule planning? And who makes the decision? Will it be made in some committee in somewhere in Westminster? Because I don't trust them. Stephen will give you the more practical thinking on that. I just don't trust them.
I'm serious. Just on that, I mean,
obviously with the seasonal worker stuff, that's why I wanted to mention it. It's something that's really quite important, because that's actually putting the fruit and veg on your plate, as you'll know, Mr. McLaren. You're preaching to the choir with me. This is live and this is ongoing. That's why I talk about the EU withdrawal bill. And then the lady from Angus who spoke earlier on, I would encourage anybody who has a Conservative member of Parliament to lobby them, and lobby them hard. Lobby me all you like. I'll be voting the way that you want me to vote on this one. And I put down amendments in my name on all of this as well. Now, one thing where I think this is something that people need. Look, there is an infinite number of letters that come from around Scotland will have less of an impact than one letter from one of my constituents. That's the way the Westminster system works, rightly or wrongly. Okay, rightly or wrongly, that's the way the system works. That my boss are my constituents, and I'm accountable to them. After the EU referendum, this is critical. After the EU referendum, Ruth Davidson said the Scottish Conservatives were in favour of us remaining part of the single market and the customs union. Now that's really important. And the Scottish Conservatives say that they are, that Ruth Davidson is the leader of the Scottish Conservatives. Not Theresa May, Ruth Davidson is the leader. So there's a challenge here. Are the Scottish Conservatives truly Scottish Conservatives? In which case, will they uphold the numbers? Will they uphold what Ruth Davidson said? In terms of the numbers, you need 6 Tories to change their minds to get something through. There are 13 Scottish Conservatives with that commitment. If anybody in this room has a Scottish Conservative Member of Parliament, you've got a lot more power over it than I do. So that's, and I'm afraid, I'm sorry to go to the grubby side of it, but once we're into the sort of trench warfare of the withdrawal bill over the next few weeks, people who are constituents putting pressure on will be much more influential. So if you've got any pals who are farmers in Angus, or Aberdeenshire, or Galloway, you name it,
who've actually got their head up from the drills and started thinking about what the bigger picture is. That's the bit you've got to worry about.
Speak to your pals who are farming elsewhere and get them to pick up the phone to folk.
I mean, is there an argument for seasonal labour constitution to be devolved to Scottish Parliament so that we could look after these industries in Scotland or
I mean, forgive me for making the political point, but before the referendum, before the EU referendum, Michael Gove was in Aberdeen. And he said that the Scottish Parliament should have say over immigration if we leave the European Union. The whole idea of that, and he acknowledged, which is immigration in Scotland is quite different. We don't have the same political issue around immigration. There's some people who think we have less, but you know, it's also in terms of our food and drink industry, our education industry. You know, we rely on immigrants, and actually we need more. I'm somebody who thinks we should be an attractive place to live, and we should have more immigrants. And Scotland has very distinctive needs on immigration than, say, the southeast of England. Okay, and it's not for me to go and tell people in the southeast of England what kind of immigration policy they ought to have. So yes, there is a very strong case for it, and yes, the promise was made, and yes, there are amendments out there. So I would encourage, just as I would encourage Michael Gove to stick to his promise that he made as a government minister and as a senior member of Vote Leave, I would encourage the Scottish Conservatives to keep to their promise that they made. And if you combine those who believe in the single market, who are right now, will be a majority if you add the Scottish Conservatives. There's a majority there, but it depends on the Scottish Conservatives.
I would put a caveat to that as well. I know that the berry pickers in your area, they were over 200 pickers short this year alone. And one of the reasons that they're citing is because it's becoming less attractive to come here. Obviously, the collapse of the pound and all the rest of it. If they're going to devolve it up here, it can't be with conditions like you'll have to have a permit which they will have to pay for and it will have to be onerous. It has to be seamless, or they're not going to bother. You're coming to pick berries and make some money. You're not coming for a career, and you're going to go through all of that heartache just to get here. If somebody else can give them seasonal work elsewhere that's paying comparatively just as well because of the way the pound is against the euro, you don't want bureaucracy getting in the way of making that even more difficult. So lobby your Tory MPs to get it through, but on the proviso that it is absolutely seamless. And that's going to be the difficulty.
say to you is there's no time like the present. We're going through this withdrawal bill now. There's no point in this all going, just like the EU referendum or triggering Article 50. There's no point all sitting around and thinking, oh, should have done more on it. If you think there's something that you can do it now. It's right now. Yeah, right now. And it's interesting what you say about the numbers. I mean, it's not fair for me to tell you what individuals have told me, but I've heard very similar stories from my part of the world as well, about numbers being down, and if they go down much further, then that's where you hit. Yeah, it's critical. Yeah.
Yes, in a word, absolutely. The EU and the UK negotiated already that they would have it's what they call TRQs, the tariff rated. Sorry, I'm really good at these remembering the names that they put on things. It's the tariff quotas that come into the EU are negotiated between the EU and whoever it is else that's in the WTO that they're negotiating with. So the tariff rated quotas for New Zealand for lamb that come into the EU, about 50% of that lamb comes into the UK. The UK and the EU have agreed on the tariff quota for lamb coming into the EU would be split accordingly. And Argentina, America, New Zealand, and Paraguay, I think it was, or Uruguay, they all went, no you don't. Our agreement, our WTO agreement, is with the EU. It's not with the EU and the UK. The UK and the EU do not have the right to then go and split that TRQ between the two EUs. We will continue to put the same volume of lamb into the EU, and if the UK wants to buy lamb, we'll have a separate agreement with them. As I said when I was speaking, the UK's prime objective is to keep food prices low. Everybody wants cheap food. They cannot produce cheap food in this country to take it from the marketplace, so they're going to have to pay us, but they've already committed to cutting the budget. If they're going to cut the budget, food has to come from somewhere. If it's going to come from somewhere, it's going to be the big producers. It's going to be South America, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Argentina. These guys can swamp our market, and our industry will vote them all. It's as simple as that. Whatever it is, it's what you're going to be getting offered. Because we come back to the PGI. In Australia, they sell a Scotch fillet. A Scotch fillet is a sirloin steak. If we do a trade negotiation with Australia, and they're allowed to sell beef into here, and they sell it as a Scotch fillet, we're relying on the supermarkets to be our gatekeepers of the provenance of our quality. I don't fancy our chances with that either. It doesn't matter what way you look at it. The UK government's direction is going to cripple farming in this country between lack of labour, lack of protection, lack of subsidy, and the overall way in which they view who we are. It doesn't seem to be important to them to have a domestic food production unless you're a massive landowner. What do they reckon? They reckon the top 25% of farms in the country will thrive or survive whatever way it goes. And I genuinely think that Michael Gove's thinking is that 25 are okay, the rest of you, you'll have to find something else to do. And I think that's the direction that they're going. So I'm selling burgers. Put it this way, a shepherd in this country will look after 1,000 to 1,500 breeding ewes, and he won't do the job the way I would like to do it. He won't do the job to the standards that it was done 40 years ago. It used to be a shepherd looked after 300 to 400 ewes, and that was his job. Now I have 1,500 ewes and maybe 100 cows, up to 100 cows. That's the only way you can make the job viable at the moment. And there will definitely be things that slip through the net. It's inevitable. There's going to be things that will slip through the net. In New Zealand, one guy will look after between 4,000 and 8,000 sheep. And it's a case of, the Lord is my shepherd. They ranch them, they bring them in huge numbers, they take off the crop of lambs, they put the sheep back again, they'll dose them, crutch them, do whatever they're going to do to them, but they certainly don't manage them in the way that we do in this country. And it's a comparison that the UK government and various others will make on a regular basis. that we could go to a New Zealand style system. We couldn't, because the public in this country wouldn't accept it. I wouldn't accept it. I wouldn't want to do that. If that was the way I was going to have to farm, I wouldn't be doing it. I just simply wouldn't be doing it. If you're going to farm purely on the basis of making money, then you forget about animal welfare. That's as simple as that.
You're right. It is difficult to figure out some of the exact import exports. See, this is the problem with the debate that we've had, a debate of absolutes. You know, that somehow that if Scotland remains part of the European Union, that somehow our trade with the rest of the UK is just going to fall off a cliff. That's patent nonsense. Absolute patent nonsense. But similarly, that's not to underplay the hugely important markets in the European Union. During the EU referendum campaign, it's always handy to have sort of little examples in the back of your mind to illustrate. One of them was broccoli until I found out that we were going to get spoiled. Room full of farmers. One of them is that there is more Scotch whisky drunk in a month in France than cognac in a year. Extraordinarily important market. Now, I'm not saying that leaving the European Union will have an impact on prices. Now, there'll be a lot of people who can continue to afford those prices, and a lot of people who will go look at something else. Just in the same way, and the point that was being made earlier on, there are people who cannot afford food when it goes too far up in prices, and that's why we've got depressingly so many food banks. Although I say people that work in food banks do extraordinary work, it's the cause of the food bank. I don't think talking in terms of absolutes, you know, this whole idea of Scotland remain part of the, you know, this stuff about the UK internal market, it just doesn't cut, because it's just not the same thing as the European Union. And also we've had 40 years of working to, you know, exporting, trying to sell things to our European partners in the same way that they sell to us that you're trying to unpick and undo. Things will not fall off a cliff, but it is much, much better to be part of it. And Scotland, especially our food and drink industry, and Jim was right earlier on, in spite of the fact that since 2007, I can't remember the figures offhand, but food and drink exports have just grown. The industry has grown to be one of our biggest industries, up there with energy, tourism, financial services. It's that much of an important industry.
Bigger than the oil.
Just wondering if you noticed that
a big part of that is because we're able to export it.
how much that actually goes through England to reach Europe.
I don't know off the top end, but you're right. But I don't have those figures. I mean, I do know that I see the Arctic trucks that sit in Pittenweem able to pick up langoustine that can be in a restaurant in France tomorrow night. But I don't have those figures. But you're right on it. I mean, we export a huge amount of food and drink to other European countries. Of course, some of it goes through.
I'm not being rude looking at my phone here. I'm looking at some statistics.
I switched mine off.
I didn't believe it. A QMS survey was done where 95% of our international trade, and that's out with the UK, I presume, is to the EU. So very little of what we're exporting red meat wise is to any place other than the EU. But it also says here that in terms of our trade with the rest of the UK, in livestock and in fresh meat, over the past 3 years, the average 15% of UK beef, 36% of sheep meat and 25% of pig meat is exported. The European Union dominates the international trade with the UK. Over the past 2 years, on average, 94% of the UK's beef exports, 88% of sheep meat exports, and 3/4 of the fresh and frozen pig meat has all gone to the EU. Now, I know that if I go and sell lambs on a Thursday in Stirling, if I'm selling black-faced lambs, I'll guarantee you that it will not be a Scottish abattoir that slaughters them. It will be slaughtered down in Wales or in England, and that will then be exported, and that will be classed as a UK or an English export as opposed to a Scottish one. But it's all come from our farms. There are lorries every week from all of the markets going down south. And the other knock-on effect of that is the AHDB
and Quality Meat Scotland are funded from levies. So every time I sell a lamb in a Scottish livestock market, there's a levy taken from that. And it's paid to Quality Meat Scotland, and their job is to promote our industry and to do research on behalf of the industry and find different markets for the industry. That money is raised entirely by levy holders, and then there's a bit put in by the government as well. When an animal is slaughtered in England, that money goes to the AHDB. When it is slaughtered in Scotland, the money goes to Quality Meat Scotland. There's £1.5 million a year in levy funding, which the Scottish Government have been trying to get back since Richard Lochhead's days in the early 2007, 2008, to bring that money back to Scotland, because it's born, reared and finished, fattened here in Scotland. It's sold in the Scottish market and then it's slaughtered down south. That money stays down south. So we lose that as our marketing money for our industry. And we also don't have a port here in Scotland anymore to export direct to the UK. And I said in the piece that I wrote in the National, if we want to be an independent country, and I know some of you don't, but I apologise, I do. If we want to be an independent country, we need to act like this. We need to build a port. And we need to have more slaughtering capacity in the country that actually works. Because they say we're over capacity at the moment. So why the hell are we sending all this stuff down south? It's to accommodate supermarkets, who are the gatekeepers of the ones that are going to stop the Australian Scotch fillets coming into our market. So I'm sorry to be such a pessimist, because this man got a reputation for being that. Right. They help keep me in the lifestyle that I've become accustomed to. That is not what subsidy is about. Subsidy is about maintaining domestic production and being able to have a food producing industry in this country. And I said right at the very start, it's a societal choice. Society will decide whether or not it wants domestic production or not. And if society doesn't want domestic production, we'll go out of business, because the Tories will implement the policies that they're going to implement, and people like me will not survive. So you may well get your way, just sit tight.
Although I'm not entirely sure about giving supermarkets money. I think supermarkets do alright. Can I just point out that supermarkets are highly efficient, doing lots of things. And farmers don't feel the efficient because most of them are.
I think with respect,
with
respect, I think that's also a sort of generalisation in that supermarkets do well make profits from a wide range of sources. You do get, I mean, look, in Scotland, for instance, what are we, 80% LFAS? 85% LFAS. Now, 85% LFAS means that's least favoured area status, so that the farmland, or the type of farmland it is. Now, you're right, we've got choices to make about the kind of food, and in Europe we have made the choice, rightly or wrongly, and I'm somebody who thinks, yeah, there are areas that you can have reform around CAP. We have made that choice to supplement some farmers' incomes because of the food and where the food comes from. But I really don't think supermarkets are the answer. And I think one of the reasons why money went into farmers' markets, for instance, a few years ago, was to try and minimise the amount of time, both in terms of geography, but in terms of fewer people between the food being produced and it actually being sold at market. I think that was a good initiative, but obviously that's difficult to roll out too far as well.